Hey everybody, welcome back to Slavic Saturday, where we talk about Slavic history, mythology, and folklore. My name is Brendan Noble, author of the Frostmark Chronicles, which is my fantasy series based on Slavic mythology. This week, we're returning to another multi-headed god in Slavic mythology. We talked about Triglav, the three-headed god, last week, so I thought we could just add ahead and talk about the four-headed god in Slavic mythology, and that is Svetovid. Before I dive too far into Svetovid, though, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in that fantasy series, the Frostmark Chronicles, and the first book in the series, A Dagger in the Wind, pre-orders have started for A Dagger in the Winds, and you can check out where to buy it down in the description below. It's available on most major retailers, currently in ebook form. Paperback wide distribution will be coming with the cover reveal on May 15th. Hardcover distribution as well. You can currently pre-order, though, the paperback and hardcover copies, even signed editions, in my store down in the description below. That's currently restricted to US only, but be sure to check those out. You can also subscribe to my newsletter down below to get your free copy of The Rider in the Night, which is the prequel novella for the series, and that will also be coming out on May 15th. So a lot of exciting things happening, but now let's get more about Slavic mythology. So like Triglav, like we talked about last week, Svetovid has a lot of references to him, at least relatively, when it comes to Slavic mythology. Specifically, he's referenced in the Christian priest Helmut's story in the Chronica Slavorum, as well as by the writer Saxo Grammaticus, who was a Danish writer as well. And so we have two different specific references to Svetovid, which is pretty unique because a lot of Slavic mythology we don't have really any primary references for, because the early Slavs didn't have writing, and what we do have tends to come from this area around the Polabians, or the western Pomeranian area in northwest Poland, northeast Germany, that was controlled by the Slavs at the time, because they were some of the last Slavic tribes to be Christianized, and so there was a little bit more writing about them than we sometimes have elsewhere. So Svetovid specifically is referenced in Dramsberg, which is the northernmost end of the island of Rügen in northeast Germany, and that was again controlled by the Slavs at the time, and was referenced as one of kind of the last real Slavic pagan strongholds that was controlled before Christianization came to the area and took it by force. And the story specifically referenced that there is a statue and within a temple that was taken on this island, and the statue had four different heads, each facing a different cardinal direction. There's stories and sometimes even colors associated with each of these heads, but there's a lot of speculation around that. I don't want to go too much into that, but I'll discuss a little bit of the debate around Svetovid later. Historically, though, there were witnesses of the sacrifices and things that occurred before this statue and within the temple. Sacrifices such as animals or different agricultural goods were very common among the Slavs, so this would make sense to appear to Svetovid, as well as he kind of appeared as either the highest deity to this section of the Slavs, or potentially a combination of deities that we'll talk about later. And these sacrifices were often made specifically to Svetovid because there was a festival for him in the harvest period in which the prediction of the coming year was to happen. So Svetovid, in his perception of him, was pictured as with the four heads, but also with the statue would have a horn in one hand, a bow in the other, and a silver sword at his side, kind of representing almost as a god of battle, but also a god of a little bit of divination. Because these four heads for thought to symbolize him being able to see everything. And so in this horn, during this festival, the priest would fill it up with mead or some type of other liquid, and throughout the festival, if the amount of mead decreased too much, then it was thought that the year was going to be bad. If it didn't, then the year was thought to be good. And these festivals also occurred, or at least divination rituals occurred for Svetovid ahead of battles or major wars that they were thought to be declaring. And this is again similar to Triglav, because Triglav was pictured with a black horse, and there were war horse rituals done for him, and have also been done for other gods across the Slavic tribes. But Svetovid is pictured with a white horse, and they would take this horse and move him across the spears that were laid across the ground. In Triglav's ritual, it was making sure that the horse didn't touch any of the spears, would be whether the battle would go well or go poorly. In Svetovid's case, if the horse led with his right leg, then it was thought that the battle would go well. If he led with his left leg, it was thought that the battle would go poorly. Again, these horse rituals were pretty common across different Slavic tribes, so it's not a surprise to see it here. And because of this combination of what the statue showed, as well as the rituals that were taking place around Svetovid, though we don't know too much besides what the Christian missionaries and theologians told us, we can kind of get the idea as Svetovid was pictured and thought of as an all-seeing god of divination and potentially war. And now this brings us into the idea of potentially why Svetovid could be a combination of gods and not just a single god. There's a lot of debate around this topic, so I still haven't been able to draw an exact conclusion, because while we know more actually about like Triglav and Svetovid than we knew about many other gods, at least what's written about them, we actually don't know the exact function that they played within the Slavic pantheon, or at least a regional variation of it. There's people who've claimed that Svetovid represents potentially a regional, or at least a slightly more later version of Urilo or Jerovit, who is a Slavic agricultural and war god. He also thought that potentially each of these heads represents a different god. There are many speculations about what those gods could be. Some claim it's Perun with one, Svarog with the other, Malkosh with the other, and Lada with the other. That would be Perun being the god of thunder, Svarog being the god of the celestial fire and creation, Lada being the goddess of love, and Malkosh being the great mother. People speculate this in with different directions. I'm pretty skeptical of this, particularly because we see this on the island of Rugen, and Lada, who is sometimes skeptical of whether she's a goddess or not as well, but also Malkosh and Svarog are more Eastern Slavic gods, and so to see them appear in the far western regions of Slavic mythology, with the extreme regionalization that occurs among the Slavic gods throughout Slavic history, is kind of makes me really skeptical that it's probably a modern perception of what they think Svetovid could have been. There is a good chance that it was a combination of regional gods that could have become combined into one. Like Triglav, we have a little bit more evidence that it was probably a combination of gods as kind of a mini pantheon shown as one. Who knows for certain? But this idea that there are some Eastern deities showing up in Rugen would be kind of surprising to me. But regardless of this debate, it's still really interesting to be able to analyze Svetovid, as well as like we did with Triglav, is while we might not know exactly their role or exactly the place they took in the Slavic mythological pantheon, we can take the idea that we can finally have a written sources with Helmut and Saxo Grammaticus showing some of the rituals and the ideas of what took place around these gods, and gives us the idea of what Slavs did with the rituals around different gods in the early Slavic paganism, because we really don't have it written down from other sources. Sure, it's very specific and sub-examples of things. While there's many other tribes out there, it's still really nice to be able to see, wow, maybe they did this or maybe they did this, and it gives us insight into things we might not see otherwise. So if you have any insight into what you think about Svetovid or Triglav or any of these multi-headed gods we've talked about the last couple weeks, be sure to comment down below. I'm always curious to hear what other people have to say as well. And in the Frostmark Chronicles, which is my series again, I'm not really planning to include Svetovid at this point. There is a good chance that he might appear in a side story or one of those novellas, or maybe later in the series, but I'm still learning more about him. I want to make sure that if he's included later in the series, that it's done well and correctly. And so I'm being a little bit slower about that inclusion. I also, there's a lot of Slavic gods, and I don't want to dump them all on the readers because that can become confusing. So we'll see what happens. Especially because of the controversy and debate around Svetovid, I don't want to portray something that isn't accurate, or it's a fantasy world, but it's still something I want to handle well. So you might see him, you might not. You definitely won't see him earlier in the series, so Who knows? But the idea of including a multi-headed god can be pretty interesting and would be fun to do in the long run. And that's all I have for you today on this Slavic Saturday video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe down below. I come out with these videos every Saturday.